A few weeks ago I was exploring some old houses on the outskirts of an abandoned town for a new article. I loved finding weird treasures and lost histories. But honestly, this place felt spooky, even for me. I was nervous but also excited. It was just an old neighborhood, right? I stepped inside one of the crumbling houses. Dust floated everywhere and the floor creaked as I walked. The walls were covered with peeling wallpaper, and a musty smell hit my nose. I felt an adrenaline rush. Maybe I could find something worth writing about. The living room was full of furniture all pushed around like someone had left in a hurry. I spotted a staircase leading up to an attic. A heavy door at the top was locked. My heart raced. Could I get in? I looked around and found an old rusty crowbar on a shelf. I figured it was worth a shot, so I bent down and wedged it between the door and the frame. With a loud creak, the door swung open. What I saw took me by surprise. The attic was filled with old journals stacked on a dusty table. They looked untouched for years. I opened the first one, and my heart sank. The handwriting was shaky. The entries talked about strange noises at night and shadows racing past the windows. I felt a chill. This was just some crazy person writing, right? Yet, I was hooked. As I read on, the entries got weirder. One detailed a neighbor's sudden disappearance. Another mentioned whispers coming from the walls. I glanced around the attic, half expecting someone to be hiding in the dark. I didn't want to imagine things, but I felt uneasy. Then I heard a noise behind me. It was faint but noticeable. Footsteps. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. My heart pounded louder. Maybe I was just paranoid. It was just an old house after all. Yet, I couldn't shake this feeling that something was wrong. I flipped through more pages trying to stay calm. My skin prickled and I started to sweat. Then I felt icy air behind me. My breath caught. I slowly turned around, and that's when I saw it. A shadow. It was barely there, hiding in the corner. I opened my mouth to yell, but no sound came out. Instinct kicked in. I had to leave. I backed away slowly, trying to be quiet. My heart was racing in my chest. I should have left earlier, I thought. Still, part of me wanted to uncover the mystery. As I moved toward the door, I could swear I heard those whispers again. They floated through the air around me. I stopped. My body was frozen. That's when I really understood I wasn't alone anymore. I didn't dare to breathe. The whispers became clearer, circling around me like a dark mist. "Get out," they seemed to say, but the voice was distorted, as if it was coming from deep within the walls. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my curiosity held me captive. The shadow twitched in the corner, flickering like a candle in the wind. I was drawn to it despite the cold fear gripping my heart. I took a cautious step forward, compelled by a mixture of dread and intrigue. Maybe it was just my imagination? But as I edged closer, the atmosphere thickened. It felt as if the room itself was breathing with me. Then, as if to answer my approach, the shadow shifted. It elongated, taking on a clearer form. A figure? I blinked in disbelief, and for a moment, I thought I was losing my mind. Did shadows take shape? Or was this just flickering light playing tricks? I stumbled back, almost losing my balance. Suddenly the whispers intensified, swirling around me in a cacophony of voices. "Help us. Remember." They called, each word coded in despair. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified but still struggling to understand. I couldn't ignore it. I had to know. I gripped the first journal tightly, waves of courage washing over me despite my racing pulse. Fumbling through the pages, I searched for answers, something that could explain the dark figure or the voices. I noticed that some of the pages were crumpled and stained as if they had been handled more recently. That's when I felt a presence behind me, heavier and colder than before. Someone, or something, was there with me in the attic. I froze again, turning my head cautiously. Through the shadows I saw a face, pale and gaunt. It stared at me with hollow eyes, filled with sorrow. Panic surged within me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure just stood there, not moving, as if trapped in time. I felt my heart racing. I needed to escape this nightmare. I finally turned on my heels, racing back to the door. As I reached the opening, the whispers crescendoed around me. "Stay. Please." Their voices bled into one another, pulling at my resolve. I flinched but pushed forward. I had to get out. I burst through the door and rushed down the stairs, the weight of the attic above me growing heavier with every step. My breathing quickened as I rushed out into the daylight, the sun hitting my face like a shock. I stumbled forward, feeling the cool air wrap around me, breaking the spell of the shadows. But just as I started to feel relief, I glanced back at the house. A thin figure stood in the attic window, staring down at me as if waiting for my return. I rubbed my eyes, half expecting it to vanish. But it was still there, watching. That evening, I sat at my desk with my notes, but my mind was consumed by the events of the day. I couldn't finish my article. There was too much I didn't understand. What had I stumbled upon? Who were those whispers for? With a mix of fear and determination, I decided I needed to learn more about the house, the past, and the stories hidden within its walls. Whatever had happened there felt unfinished. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The next day I woke up with a sense of dread. Memories of the attic haunted me, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I needed to find out more about the figure in the window and the whispered pleas for help. I decided to visit Mrs. Caldwell, my elderly neighbor who had lived in the area for decades. She might have information about the house's past. I knocked on her door, my heart racing. When she answered, I was greeted by a smile that faded quickly as she saw my expression. "What's wrong, dear?" she asked, concern coloring her voice. "I found something in the old house," I mumbled, wishing I had chosen my words more carefully. "Can you tell me about it?" Mrs. Caldwell hesitated, her gaze drifting to the ground. I could see her mind working, sifting through memories. "That house has a history," she finally said, her voice low. "Years ago, a family lived there. Something tragic happened." "Tragic?" I pressed, leaning a little closer. "2 children went missing," she continued, her eyes widening. "They were never found. People say the house is cursed. The parents, they never recovered." A chill ran down my spine. I felt a mix of pity for the lost children and fear of what it all meant. "What do you mean by cursed?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Some say you can't escape it. The sorrow stays. Those who live there can't let go," Mrs. Caldwell told me, looking genuinely frightened. I wouldn't play around with it. Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Her warning raced through my mind. I still wanted to investigate, but suddenly it seemed much scarier than before. I thanked her and hurried back home, unsure of what I should do next. Later, as I reviewed my notes, I noticed something strange in one of the journals. A family tree was sketched out connecting the names of the family who had lived in the house with the missing children's names written in red ink. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Was this some sort of clue? I checked the date on the sketch. It was decades old. The names should have faded from memory, yet here they were, preserved as if waiting for someone to find them. I couldn't believe it. This was more than just a story. It was a mystery that demanded to be solved. Just then my phone buzzed, pulling me from my thoughts. I looked down to see a message from an unknown number. "You need to stop looking. Leave it alone." My heart dropped. Who could it be? Was someone watching me? Suddenly a cold breeze swept through the room, making the hairs on my arm stand on end. I glanced toward the window and gasped. In that moment I felt the weight of unseen eyes on me again, pressing down like a dark cloud. Every instinct in me screamed to flee, but I also felt an undeniable pull to uncover the truth. Perhaps I should have listened to Mrs. Caldwell. I didn't know who I'd upset by digging too deep. But one thing was certain. My investigation was far from over. I took a deep breath and settled back down, determined to uncover the mystery, whatever the cost. The next morning I woke with a sense of urgency. The warning from Mrs. Caldwell echoed in my head, but I couldn't shake the need to learn more. I grabbed my notebook and made a plan to visit the town library. Maybe I could find old newspaper articles or records that shed light on the family and the missing children. As I walked toward the library, an unsettling feeling lingered. It was quiet. Too quiet. I shrugged off the chill creeping up my spine, attributing it to my overactive imagination. The library was welcoming. Tall bookshelves filled with volumes and a comforting mustiness that reminded me of my own home. I headed straight for the local history section. Hours slipped by as I sifted through dusty archives and yellowed newspapers. Articles detailed the family that lived in the old house, marked by words like mysterious disappearance and unresolved tragedy. The more I read, the heavier my heart grew. My fingers stopped at an article dated just a few weeks after the children went missing. It spoke of strange noises from the house and sightings of a woman who roamed the grounds, searching for something lost. My stomach twisted. Could she be the figure I saw in the window? Just then, a voice jolted me from my thoughts. "Can I help you?" It was the librarian, a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses perched on her nose. "I'm looking for information about the family who lived in the old house on Elm Street," I said, my heart racing. Her expression changed. "Oh, that house. Yes, it has quite a reputation." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Most people avoid it, you know. They say weird things happen there." I nodded, not wanting to admit that I was one of those who was drawn to it. "Have you ever heard about the children who went missing?" The librarian hesitated. "Just rumors. They say you can still hear them calling for help." A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I pressed on. "Do you have any records? Anything that might explain what happened?" "I can show you what we have," she replied. "But not everyone who investigates comes back whole." Her words hung in the air like a warning bell, but I was determined. I followed her to a back room filled with old files. She handed me a few documents that looked promising, but as I flipped through them, I noticed something odd. In one of the records, a name I didn't recognize was written in the margin, Irene Holloway. I frowned, trying to connect it to what I'd already learned. "Who is Irene Holloway?" "I don't know," she said, a frown creasing her forehead. "But that name does show up in relation to the house." My curiosity piqued. Who was she? Was she involved in the children's disappearance? Then the lights flickered. I glanced around the room, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. The librarian stepped back, a flicker of fear in her eyes. It's never done that before. I felt the air thicken around me as a creeping sensation settled in my gut. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. Before she could answer, the door behind me slammed shut, echoing through the rows of books. A panic surged. Someone was in the building with us. "Stay close," she whispered, her face pale. I didn't question it. I needed to find out who Irene Holloway was, and fast. With my heart racing, I bolted toward the door, determined to uncover the truth before it was too late. I turned the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. Panic set in. I pulled harder, but it was as if it was locked from the outside. My breath quickened. "It won't open," I shouted, glancing back at the librarian, who stood frozen, her eyes darting around the dimly lit room. "Help me find another way out," I urged, my voice strained. "Follow me," she said, her tone grave. She darted toward a small window at the far end of the room, her fingers fumbling with the latch. My instincts screamed at me. I didn't want to be trapped here, especially with that heavy feeling in the air. Suddenly, I heard footsteps echoing in the hallway outside. They were slow and deliberate. I exchanged worried glances with the librarian. Who else was in the library? My heart raced faster than I thought possible. "Please hurry," I urged her. The librarian finally managed to open the window, but it was too small for either of us to squeeze through. "Maybe we can shout for help," I suggested. But before I could make a sound, a shadow moved past the door. I felt my stomach drop. The librarian pressed her finger to her lips, silencing me. Just as I thought we'd escape notice, the door swung open. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the dim hallway lights. My breath caught in my throat. "Looking for something?" the figure asked, their voice cold and mocking. I couldn't see their face clearly, but dread settled in my bones. I stepped backward instinctively, knocking into a stack of books. They tumbled to the floor, the noise sharp and echoing. The figure stepped forward. "Get away from here," the librarian said, her voice suddenly steady. "You shouldn't be lurking around these parts." The figure laughed, a chilling sound that made my skin crawl. "You don't get to tell me what to do." The tension in the room thickened. I felt trapped. But something about the way the librarian stood her ground gave me hope. "Who are you?" I demanded, ready to defend myself if needed. "Someone who knows what happens when you dig too deep," the figure replied, their tone dripping with menace. I glanced around the room, desperate for a distraction or an escape route. "What do you know about Irene Holloway?" I blurted out, desperately grasping for information. The figure's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of interest crossing their face. "Irene, you're not as clueless as you look," they said, taking a step closer. "But chasing shadows can lead to dark places." "What do you mean?" I pressed, my voice rising in a mix of fear and determination. "I can't help you," they said almost regretfully. "But it's too late for you already." Suddenly a loud crash came from the adjacent room, startling everyone. The figure hesitated, glancing over their shoulder. "You need to leave now." Before I could react, they lunged toward the door and bolted out into the hallway. "Should we follow?" I asked, my heart pounding. "No," the librarian replied, her face pale. "They're the least of our worries." That's when I saw it. A dark shape scuttling along the wall, and a chilling realization washed over me. It didn't crawl like any animal I knew. It was moving too fast, slipping through the shadows. "Run!" I shouted, feeling a primal instinct take over. We had to get out. My mind raced with questions. What had just happened? Who was Irene Holloway, and why was this all happening now? As we dashed for the door, I glanced back one last time. The room felt heavier, the shadows closing in around us. We couldn't wait to find out what lay ahead. Our next move might be the most dangerous yet. The librarian and I sprinted down the narrow corridor, our footsteps echoing in a panic-fueled rhythm. I could hardly think straight. The escape route was a blur as I pushed through the heavy door leading into a new part of the library. "Where do we go?" I panted, glancing nervously over my shoulder, half expecting the dark shape to follow. "Just keep moving," she urged, her voice strained but firm. We headed deeper into the labyrinth of shelves. Once filled with knowledge, the library now felt like a haunted maze. As we rounded a corner, my eyes landed on a door marked "Restricted Access." It looked almost inviting in our situation. "What about there?" I suggested, my pulse racing. The librarian hesitated. "That's not a good idea. We don't want to draw attention." "Please," I pleaded. "We've got to take a chance." She nodded reluctantly. I pushed the door open. To my surprise, it led to a small room stacked high with dusty boxes and old furniture. A single light bulb flickered overhead, casting strange shadows that danced on the walls. I stepped inside, feeling a strange pull toward a specific stack of boxes. "What do you think is in here?" I asked, trying to distract myself from what had just happened. "Probably just old records," she replied, scanning the cluttered space. Her fingers shook slightly. "We need to get out of here." Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from the corridor behind us. I turned sharply, my heart racing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, fear flooding my veins. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to move now." As we searched for another way out, my eyes fell on a tattered book lying on top of one of the boxes. It looked out of place among the dust and chaos. The title, Tales of Forgotten Souls, pulled me in. I reached for it, my curiosity getting the better of me. The book felt warm in my hands, strange for something so old. I flipped it open. Pages were filled with stories, but one caught my attention, one about Irene Holloway. There she was, described as a seeker of lost truths, who went missing under suspicious circumstances. "Look at this," I said, letting the librarian see the page. "Not now. We can't waste time on this." She sounded panicked, her urgency palpable. Before I could respond, a loud crash sounded from the door we had entered. My breath caught in my throat. The sight of the dark shape creeping closer to the threshold chilled me to the bone. "Time's up," the librarian hissed, her voice laced with desperation. "We have to go. Now." We bolted from the room, the book still clutched in my hands. The corridor felt like a tunnel swallowing us whole. Shadows closed in again, faster this time, swirling around us. Just as we reached the exit, I glimpsed a figure darting into the hallway. It wasn't the same intimidating figure from before. This one was smaller, hunched over, and moved with terrifying speed. "Oh no!" I gasped, stumbling backward. The librarian gripped my arm. "Don't look back. Keep running." We stumbled out into a larger foyer, and I realized how lost we truly were. The exit was further than it appeared, and the once comforting sound of voices faded away. "Where do we go now?" I asked, my voice shaky. "That way, towards the front," she shouted, her eyes wide with urgency. But just as we turned towards the exit, I noticed something glinting in the light. It was a key, old and ornate, lying right in our path. I hesitated. "Wait, that could be important." "Oh, for heaven's sake," she exclaimed. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that this key might unlock more than just doors. As I reached down to grab it, a scream echoed through the library, freezing us both in place. "What was that?" I stammered, my heart racing anew. "I don't know, but we need to leave. Now." With the key clenched tight in my fist, we took off toward the exit, unsure of what awaited us outside, but knowing we couldn't look back. The darkness was creeping closer, and whatever it was desperate to catch us. The air felt thick as we sprinted toward the exit, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows behind us. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for us to falter. The librarian's grip on my arm was a lifeline, fiercer than I expected. "Think we're safe?" I asked, glancing once more toward the dark corridors we had just fled. She didn't answer, her eyes fixed ahead, and the urgency in her expression spoke louder than words. When we finally reached the heavy door leading outside, my heart sank. It was locked. "What? No!" I gasped, banging my fists against it. "What do we do?" "There has to be another way," she shouted, scanning the walls frantically. "There are emergency exits. We must find one." We couldn't waste time. I felt the weight of the key in my pocket, a small sliver of hope amidst the panic. "What about the key?" I blurted out. "Maybe it unlocks something here." The librarian paused, her brow furrowing. "This isn't the time to gamble with a key." She shot a glance down the corridor. "We have to decide quickly." My mind raced. But what if it leads to a hiding place, or another exit? We can't just... Before I could finish, the sound of scuttling footsteps echoed behind us, louder and more menacing than before. I froze as I caught a glimpse of that smaller figure. It was hunched and twisted, moving impossibly fast, like a shadow come to life. "Go!" she yelled, breaking me out of my paralysis. We darted back down the corridor, and I grasped the key tighter, wishing I could see what it unlocked. I suddenly remembered the lift at the far side of the library, almost hidden behind tall shelves. "There!" I pointed, my voice urgent. "If we can reach the lift, maybe we can escape to another level." We turned, bolting toward the lift. With every step, I felt like the darkness was nipping at my heels. I could hear the breathless noise of whatever pursued us closer than ever. Once we reached the lift, my hands trembled as I pressed the button, frustration mixing with fear. "Come on, come on!" The doors opened with a slight creak. We stepped inside, and I quickly hit the button for the basement level, a part of the library that had always been rumored to be off-limits. As the doors started to close, I caught a glimpse of the figure just as it reached the entrance. Its eyes shone momentarily in the low light, and a shiver ran down my spine. The lift descended with a jolt, and I leaned back against the wall, panting. "What have we done?" the librarian murmured, her voice shaky. "I don't know," I admitted, staring at the key in my hand. "But I think we've opened something that shouldn't be opened." The doors slid open, and I stepped out into a dimly lit basement lined with rows of ancient books. Dust covered everything, and the air felt cool and damp. A wooden door stood at the far end, slightly ajar, inviting yet foreboding. That's when I saw it. A flickering light coming from inside that doorway. My heart raced. "What's that light?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we can't stay here," she urged, her eyes wide with panic. But part of me felt drawn toward the door. Whatever lay beyond it might hold the answers we desperately needed. "Wait," I said, taking a step forward, key in hand. "We can't just leave." As the shadows shifted around us, a low growl echoed from the darkness behind the door. "Let's go," the librarian yelled, tugging my sleeve. But I stood rooted, staring at the ominous glow before me. I could feel something lurking just out of sight, waiting for my choice. Then everything went dark, and my decision slipped away. I gasped as my eyes adjusted to the sudden darkness. The flickering light had vanished, leaving only uneven shadows that danced around us. I could hear the librarian's breath quickening beside me, mirroring my own rising panic. "What just happened?" I whispered, scanning the area, half expecting the figure we had fled to reappear. "Stay close," she murmured, her tone steadying as she grabbed my arm again. "We have to find a light switch or something." I nodded, trying to suppress my racing heart. We moved cautiously into the basement, our footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that blanketed the floor. I felt uneasy stirring in my stomach. It was as if the darkness had a mind of its own, wrapping us in a suffocating embrace. We approached the wooden door, still slightly ajar. The key hung heavily in my pocket, almost humming with energy. "What if it unlocks that door?" I suggested, pointing towards it. "No," she shot back, her voice a mix of firmness and fear. "We have no idea what's on the other side. We need to find a way out, not a way deeper in." But our options felt limited. The basement was devoid of visible exits, and the flickering light that had lured me seemed more like a distant memory now. The thought of turning back haunted me. That thing we had run from was still out there. Just then a scratching sound erupted from behind the door, a desperate clawing noise that made my skin crawl. My breath caught in my throat. Was it trying to get in? "I think we should," I started, but she cut me off. "No, we can't stand here." She pressed against my back, urging me away from the door and deeper into the room. As we retreated, I noticed something glinting in the faint glow of the remaining light filtering in from the lift. It was a small rusted lantern perched on an old desk piled high with dusty books. I took a step toward it, adrenaline kicking in. "Wait!" But it was too late. I seized the lantern, feeling its cool metal against my palm. "Do you think it still works?" she asked, glancing anxiously at the door as if it might explode open at any moment. I fiddled with the latch. "There's only one way to find out." I struck a match from the pocket of my jacket, holding my breath as I brought it to the wick. The flame flickered to life, casting swirling shadows around us. As the light spread, its warmth chased the cold fear away, but it also revealed the true extent of the basement's secrets. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, glowing faintly in response, hinting at something far more sinister. "Look," I said, pointing. She stepped closer, her eyes wide with recognition. "These markings, they don't belong here." Her voice trembled. "This is a language I've never seen before." My pulse quickened as I felt an unsettling realization wash over me. What if those markings were somehow connected to the thing pursuing us? What if they held the key to its origins? "Do you think—" I hesitated, an unsettling thought creeping in. "Do you think it's a warning?" Before she could respond, the ground beneath us trembled slightly. A deep rumble echoed through the basement, making the lantern flicker. "Something's not right," she said, her voice almost breaking. And that's when I heard it. A faint whispering sound, more chilling than the growl before. "Get the key ready," I whispered, clutching the lantern tighter. "We might need it." but I felt a deep hesitation as I turned back to the door. Whatever lay beyond seemed to be awakening. The lantern's glow wavered as the whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls like an incantation. I turned my head, trying to pinpoint the source, but the noise seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. My heart raced again, pounding against my chest like a caged bird. "Do you hear that?" the librarian whispered, her eyes darting around, searching the darkness. I nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening. "Maybe we should go." "Leave?" I suggested, though the words tasted bitter and weak on my tongue. "No," she replied firmly. "We need to understand what we're dealing with. Maybe those symbols could help." She pointed to the markings on the wall, her curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. A fresh wave of unease washed over me. They felt more like a trap than a clue. Still, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that we were being lured down a dismal path. I squinted at the symbols. They were unlike anything I had seen, intricate lines twisting around each other, forming shapes that seemed to pulse slightly under the light. "What do you think they mean?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we should try to decipher them. Maybe we can find a way to protect ourselves." As she leaned closer, the lantern's flame flickered violently, making her jump back. "Wait," she exclaimed, glancing at the door. "It's coming." My blood ran cold. I distinctly heard a thud against the door, resonating through the floor like a low drum. The librarian grabbed my arm again, and together we backed away from the wall, our eyes fixed on the door. With every breath, the whispers seemed to intensify, coiling around us like tendrils of mist. "If we keep standing here, we're just bait," I whispered urgently. "Let me try something." She knelt, rummaging through the papers scattered on the desk. I held the lantern above her, casting a protective light over her frantic movements. "What are you looking for?" I asked, trying to suppress the rising paranoia. "Anything. A phrase. A hint. Something that could help us." Just as she spoke, a shudder ran through the basement, rattling the lantern in my hand. I felt the air grow thick and heavy, almost pulsating alongside the shadows. "That!" she shouted, pointing to the far wall, where the symbols began to glow brighter, almost humming. "It's responding to something." I squinted, trying to discern what she was seeing. "Responding to what?" "Maybe something we say. Try repeating the last words you heard." I hesitated. What if it's asking for something? Then we give it something." She cast a glance back at the door, where another thud echoed, sharper and more insistent this time. My instincts screamed at me to escape, but I also felt a strange compulsion to uncover the truth. "Okay," I said, my voice finally betraying my fear. "But if this goes south, we're out of here." She nodded, standing as tall as she could amidst the encroaching darkness. Together. As I began to repeat the faint whisper that had haunted us, the basement trembled again, and the door shook violently. My heart sank. Whatever was on the other side could sense our resolve, and it was hungry. "Now!" she yelled, and with a sudden surge of adrenaline, I bellowed the words louder. That's when the shadows twisted and surged toward us. My mind reeled. Was it too late? I gripped the lantern tightly, prepared for whatever might come next. The shadows surged around us, thick and oppressive, as if they had come alive to swallow us whole. The librarian and I stood our ground, hearts racing in time with the chaos unfolding. I could feel the whispers crawling over my skin, invading my thoughts, urging me to run, to surrender, but I held on to the flickering light of the lantern like a lifeline. "Keep saying it," the librarian urged, her eyes locked on the glowing symbols. "We have to show it we're not afraid." I found my voice, though it trembled with every syllable. "Get away! Help us! Remember!" The words fell from my lips with a desperate urgency, echoing into the darkness while the air around us vibrated with a dissonant energy. In response, the symbols on the wall pulsated with life, sending waves of light cascading through the basement. "Look!" I shouted, pointing at the symbols. They glowed brighter, seeming to resonate with the very essence of my words. As I spoke, I felt a shift in the air, The darkness seemed to recoil, rolling back as if acknowledging my plea. For a moment, I sensed a presence almost like a breath, cool and distant, drifting through the shadows. Then it vanished, replaced by an unbearable weight. "What's happening?" the librarian gasped, her gaze darting to the door. The pounding had stopped, replaced by an unsettling silence that tightened around us like a noose. But before I could respond, another crash echoed through the basement, more ferocious and relentless than before. The door buckled under the pressure, splintering at the edges. I tightened my grip on the lantern, the flame flickering dangerously low. "It's coming!" I exclaimed, retreating toward the stack of boxes we'd stumbled across earlier. I had no plan. Only instinct told me to put something between us and whatever lay beyond the door. We began to pile old crates and furniture, hoping it would buy us time. Each thud against the door sent tremors through my body, each one a reminder of our impending doom. "Is this what we really want?" the librarian asked, her voice strained as she shoved another box against the door. "Maybe we should have left it alone." I shot her a look, feeling frustration and fear churn in my stomach. "We can't just ignore this. If there are lost souls here, we can't let it continue." "What if it wants to trap us like it did before?" she countered, glancing nervously at the door as it shuddered violently under the assault. The weight of my conviction trembled beneath the pressure of her fear. I didn't have the answers. I was merely chasing shadows now, the same shadows that had lured me into this twisted nightmare. But the lantern flickered back to life for the briefest moment, sending tendrils of light swirling across the room, revealing outlines of the symbols against the far wall. They pulsed gently, and I felt a tug, a connection. Whatever force had called to us, it wanted to be heard. But could we trust it? "Help me!" The whispers intensified, a chorus of desperate voices swirling around us again. Adrenaline surged. I had to take a leap of faith. "Listen," I shouted, directing my voice towards the symbols. "Help us! What do you need?" Suddenly, the lantern illuminated a small alcove I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind the clutter. I felt the cold fingers of urgency curl around my spine. "There!" I pointed, feeling the hope rise like a tide. Maybe that's a way out. The librarian's eyes widened, and without waiting for another word, we moved instinctively, pushing aside boxes and debris. The door rattled with terrifying ferocity behind us as we stumbled toward the alcove. As we neared, the symbolism etched into the wall became clearer. They weren't just markings, they appeared to tell a story, perhaps a warning or a history waiting to be remembered. What if this is it? What if it can set them free? I whispered, scrambling closer. With a renewed sense of determination, I pressed my palm against the cold wall, feeling the vibrations hum beneath the surface. It was alive, resonating with the very pulse of fear and sorrow that had haunted this place for so long. What do I do? I turned, facing the librarian, desperation etched in my voice. "Say their names," she cried, her fear giving way to something fiercer, an instinct for truth. "Irene, Ellen, Michael," I called out, ignorance turning to an understanding that these were more than mere names. They were spirits trapped in a cycle, searching for a way home. "We remember you. We're here. Keep going," she encouraged, even as we felt the relentless pressure of the door straining against our barricade. But something shifted. Then, a blinding flash erupted from the alcove. The air shimmered, distorting our reality. Light burst forth, encompassing the entire basement, illuminating the walls and driving back the darkness like an unstoppable tide. I staggered back, shielding my eyes. The whispers crescendoed and transformed into a harmonious chant, resonating deep within my core. "Thank you." The words rippled through the air, a soft caress layered with warmth. As the light expanded, I felt it wash over us, cleansing and releasing burdens that had lingered too long. I glanced at the librarian, wide-eyed as we both shared an understanding. We were not just mere observers of the past. We were part of it now. Then silence enveloped us. The light receded, and with it, the oppressive weight of darkness. The door behind us had collapsed, revealing an empty hallway bathed in early morning light that filtered through dusty windows. We stood on the precipice between two worlds, past and present, reality and shadow. I breathed heavily, feeling the rush of adrenaline slowly ebbing away. "Did we do it?" the librarian murmured, her eyes scanning the now peaceful basement, a stark contrast to the chaos that had filled it moments ago. I hesitated, the answers lingering just out of reach. "I think we helped them," I said slowly, though doubt swirled in my gut. "But why? And what exactly will happen now?" We made our way through the fallen debris, stepping cautiously into the sunlight that poured in through the new passage. A part of me shivered at the thought of what lay in the shadows behind us. Unyielding questions, lost souls, perhaps a deeper cut into something that had always been there but never revealed. I stepped away from the wreckage, contemplating the mystery ahead and all that remained unexplained. Would those hauntings return? Could we ever truly escape what we had uncovered? As I looked back one last time at the library, its secret still hidden beneath layers of time, I knew those questions would linger far longer than I wished. With an uneasy sigh, I moved forward, leaving the darkness behind, all too aware that the echoes of fear and hope would forever weave through my thoughts. Some things might be meant to stay buried, but I could never quite shrug off the weight of the shadows, even in the sunlight. I could feel their watchful presence, lingering just beyond sight, and I knew the story wasn't finished yet.